I'm nervous. That never happens. But there have been so many esteemed colleagues that have come up here and had such amazing things to say. And there are even some people in this room today that had more of an influence on the program I'm going to talk about than I did. So I'm here to talk about Menos, also known as Mobility as a Service. Nico told me two things. He's like, come up with a pithy name and also tell us the problems. Like, this is a place for you to be candid and to talk about the challenges. Now, I think it's really interesting that the presenter before me was talking about narrative, because that's exactly what this is about. It's about controlling the narrative and talking about a program, because there's a lot of interpretations about the program and its success. But I'm here to talk about all of it. So first, I'm egotistical, so I'm going to start with a story about me. A tale of two Kims. So the picture on the left is me in my heyday at DDOT, where I was managing Capital Bike Share. I like to refer to myself as the queen of bike share. I was there for a number of years, oversaw the program, and had many ways to access it. At one point, I even had a golden key that would unlock any bike and as many bikes as I want at any time in the system. So I was the expert. Fast forward, I moved to the city of Pittsburgh. I became a mom. I almost chose a picture of my toddler behind the wheel of our car pretending to drive, because that's how much time I spend in a car now compared to on my bike. But I had to show off that we still do bike around. But point being, my perspective changed. My time I had to myself, my time to choose to bike diminished a little bit. And I lost my golden key, which I'm still kind of upset about. So the story, I was in DC for a conference, TRB, a little well-known transportation conference, and I needed to go from here to there. It was a straight shot. I knew how to bike there. I literally installed the bike share station that was at my origin point, which was a 2-minute walk from where I was staying, and I was debating whether or not I would bike. The weather was great. It wasn't going to take me that long, but I no longer had my golden key. I no longer had the Capital Bike Share app. I didn't want to deal with a machine. I didn't want to deal with a credit card. And so I really debated just taking some other mode that day. But when I opened up my Lyft app, I saw that I could unlock a bike. And that is what got me to unlock a bike and to go on a ride. So point being, even someone who not only drank the Kool-Aid, but was making it and serving it for others can fall out of that habit. And if we want to change the narrative, if we want to change the reality, if we want to make our streets safer and to get more people around without cars, then we have to make it absolutely as easy as possible for people to make that choice. So Move PGH, which, as I mentioned, former founding director Karina Ricks in the back. If Alex Paz is still in the room, he was with the city of Pittsburgh in 2019 when these goals for the Mobility as a Service program, known as Move PGH, were conceived. And the whole point is that we wanted to make it easier for people to get around our city of Pittsburgh, without having to take a car, to be able to connect between multiple modes, and to not have to figure out the technology to do it, the payment to do it, or even where the physical assets were located. So I have to give credit. Who here, raise your hands, do you remember the easy buttons from Office Depot or Staples or something years ago? After I was a bus driver, I worked for Arlington County, Virginia, known for its TOD, amazingness. And I worked closely with someone named Chris Hamilton, who was the Commuter Services Bureau Chief 15, 20 years ago. All right, Gabe knows Chris. He literally bought these buttons for everybody in the office, because his point as the Commuter Services Bureau Chief was that we were going to make it easy for people to get around without their cars. And I still remember that today, and I still live by it. When I talk about mobility as a service, I mean integrating transportation options not only in physical places, so that if you're switching from a bike to a bus, from a train to a bike or a scooter, that you can do it without having to walk super far or to navigate, and in a digital location, so that you can trip plan and have those things connected and spelled out for you. And in the perfect world, and in the original vision, and hopefully a vision we'll ultimately get to, you can pay for all those in your phone too in one single app. So how did we get here in Pittsburgh with our Mobility as a Service program? Well, in 2019, the city issued an RFP. I think that's what makes Pittsburgh really interesting, because a lot of cities are doing something very similar, but the city of Pittsburgh at that time said, we're gonna procure this. We're gonna put it on the industry to come forward with a streamlined solution that brings together multiple shared services and will make it easy for not only folks to get around, but for the city with a very small staff to manage. In 2019, the Pittsburgh Mobility Collective, which was led by Spin Scooters, was selected. And as you can see here, there was a big gap. 2019, that group came together, but the program did not launch until summer of 2021. I'll talk a little bit later about some of the challenges with having to rely on a state. Again, I came from DC, which is a unicorn, no county to deal with. We were the city and the state, super streamlined. That wasn't the case in Pittsburgh. The positives, the Maas of having a 2-year runway, is that we had a chance to get it right in terms of planning, in terms of making sure there were affordability programs, in terms of the infrastructure that would make it successful. But the problem is that 2 years is also a long time, especially in an industry with a mode and a form factor like e-scooters and dockless vehicles in general that rapidly is changing. So as you can see here, there are a number of partners as part of Move PGH. Pittsburgh Regional Transit is the primary transit provider for the city of Pittsburgh. They have buses, light rail, and inclines. You can also see here that some of those providers changed. When we launched, there was Scooby mopeds. They have since exited the market. Pogo used to be called Healthy Ride, and in that 2 years since we launched, less than 2 years since we launched, they've completely transitioned their entire bike share equipment to a totally new provider and changed their footprint. And we had some other changes as well. And so one of the benefits of having this relationship where the city put out an RFP and established this relationship with these providers is that even though there were all these changes in the marketplace, we still had a program. We were still able to operate. People were still able to get around because we were able to provide some stability because the city wasn't changing, but the providers may have. But we still all had a collective goal, which was to get people around easily. So mobility hubs, these are those physical locations where we've co-located services. As you can see here, we have a small network of charging stations, which is great. I know a lot of research has come out recently, some of it questioning whether or not electric scooter fleets are better for the environment or worse for the environment than cars. I would like to think that the intuitive choice is that they're better than cars and that the data really should be supporting that, but there are some people who think that the data does not. Having stations so that the scooters can charge on your streets is really good for that. It reduces the amount of times that trucks or vans have to drive around to pick them up. These stations also have good information on them, wayfinding information telling you about the program so that you can learn about the transit app, download it, and then you've got your one-stop shop for information. And we incentivize people to end their trips at the stations for scooters by giving them a discount. Now, even though Move PGH is a mobility as a service program, e-scooters as a form factor were launched with Move PGH, and so that's where I focus a lot of my time talking because it was the new program. And it's the one that also is somewhat in jeopardy because the e-scooters are only legal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as part of our 2-year pilot, which is set to end in July. So the digital locations where everything is co-located is into the transit app. Most of you are probably familiar with the transit app. You know that it's great not only for trip planning, so you can see exactly how to get from point A to point B, even if it includes multiple modes, but for some of our services that are natively integrated, you can pay right there. So for the transit service, you can pay, and as part of this program, we were able to integrate the bike share program. So our equity programs. Because we had a 2-year runway, because the state didn't even allow scooters for so many years after we had seen them enter the market, we had a time to see where some of the challenges were in the service provisions in other places. We wanted to make sure that the scooters, especially, were not only physically accessible in terms of being all over our city and requiring deployment in most zones, but also financially accessible. So as you can see on the left, the Spin Access program is one that you register for by demonstrating financial need by already being in another governmental program. So there's some barriers there. You have to demonstrate need. But when you do, you qualify for an 80% discount, and nearly 400 people are getting that discount today. On the right are our access zones. Now this is something that I'm pretty sure Pittsburgh was the first city to have in place, and again, that's the benefit of us being hand in hand with the operator and also having a runway to setting up the program. So just by physically being in one of these pre-identified zones that we've identified by looking at income, racial demographics, and some other criteria, you unlock a discount. We made it easy. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to qualify in some special way. Just by being there, your trip is 30% cheaper than if you started in a higher income neighborhood next door. So results. For transit, and again, transit app, I believe, preceded Move PGH, but we would like to think that we've raised a lot of awareness and brought people to it because of the opportunity to access all these other services. But nearly half of trips on the transit system and half the riders are being achieved through the app. And as you can see here, millions and millions of dollars are coming through transit app to our transit provider. That's that many times that people didn't have to pull out a credit card, didn't have to get confused getting onto a bus whether or not they had the right amount of money. In terms of spin, again, I said we launched this as part of Move PGH, so we talk a lot about this data because, again, narrative. This is the other. This is the form factor that was new to our street, and so it's the one that gets a lot of attention. Nearly 1 million trips have been achieved on about 1,000 scooters in less than 2 years. You can see we have calculated some carbon reductions based on that, but what's really interesting is that over 200,000 unique people have signed up to use Spin. The population of Pittsburgh is 300,000 people. So I don't think those 200,000 people were, of course, all residents of Pittsburgh, but just to share the magnitude and the scale of how many times someone came to our city and tried out this service is huge and hugely successful. So car access. About 20% of households in the city of Pittsburgh don't have access to a car, but 50% of Spin users don't have access to a car. What that demonstrates to me is that we are reaching some of those communities and underserved folks who are mobility challenged, and that this is providing a benefit. As you can see here, a lot of these trips are being used to connect to transit. And if you get a conversation with the head of our transit authority, she would tell you that she supports this program. And as you can see here, and I think this is one of the most compelling points, based on survey data, over a third of those 1 million trips would have been taken by a car if a scooter was not there. 300,000 times someone didn't take a car. That's really important for safety. So rider testimonials, this is what it's about. I won't go through reading these, but basically it says, having access to scooters has made my life better. It means I have easier access to get where I need to go, more independence, flexibility, and it's fun, which I don't think we should discount, especially in today's times. So now the challenges, the stuff that Nico really wanted me to focus on. Mobility hubs. When this program was launching, we wanted to have 50 mobility hubs. So again, places where scooters could get charged and that they'd be co-located with other modes. We only got to 25 mobility hubs. The first 25 were really easy to install. We've plugged into our street lights. That's something that I don't think a lot of communities have done with their charging infrastructure, but because we were the city, we were able to leverage that resource and make it easy to get some of this infrastructure installed. But we want to see more. We need way more, especially when we talk about some of the challenges about scooters being left in places that they're not supposed to be left, like the middle of a sidewalk. We need more places that they should be left, that are easily identifiable and helping with those carbon emissions by also charging. The transit app integrations. You cannot unlock a Spin scooter and start a trip in transit app. Does anybody here work for transit app? Raise your hand. Anytime I meet someone from transit app, I give them grief, so maybe that's why you're not raising your hand right now. We don't want this to be the end of the story. It needs to be as easy it was for me to go into Lyft and unlock a bike share bike. And we would prefer to do it probably with somebody like transit app than maybe a TNC provider for some of the obvious reasons. But as we look at the future of the program, we'll consider all options that are gonna get us to the vision that we want and that we have, which is that it's easy and streamlined and gonna get people out of their cars. So another challenge is scooters as a form factor. Yesterday in one of my sessions, I asked people to raise their hands, somebody asked people to raise their hands, do you want AVs in your city? And if you do, why? I think scooters are kind of similar. Again, back to narrative. Some people view them as just a nuisance. They're on the sidewalks. Sometimes they're in the roadway and they're laying down and they're annoying. That is true. We do not have perfect riding or parking behavior. I do think, however, especially in a city where you technically, by city code, are allowed to park your car on a sidewalk, if it's to protect other vehicles or traffic or something like that, that having a scooter is a less of an impediment, and especially a fleet-operated scooter where I have influence over the person who owns that scooter more than I would over independent owners of a car, that it's annoying, but I think there's a future where we can fix it. Real and perceived safety risk. So, yeah. People fall off their scooters. They hit potholes and they get hurt. Until really recently, we believed that nobody had died riding a Spin scooter in our city. We learned that that may not be the case. There may have been someone who crashed, went home, and later succumbed to injuries that they didn't realize that they had sustained because it was internal. That's not great, but when I am asked and questioned, how do you sleep at night keeping this form factor on your streets when people get hurt riding it? What I tell myself is that if someone's on a scooter and they hit a child riding their bike, that kid riding their bike will probably live, which is not the story for when that kid has been hit by cars in our city. Unlike most modes of transportation, or at least compared to driving a car, someone riding a scooter is choosing, in a lot of ways, to ride that scooter, and they take that risk on themselves, and they bear that risk because they're exposed. Unlike people who might, drive a car and then they're pretty protected, but the people around them are not. And so I still think, even though the litmus test maybe shouldn't be the privately operated automobile, it has to be when we're thinking of ways to get people around without them. And then data validity, it's been questioned. Do you really think Spin took 1 million trips? Do you really think that 35% of those people, that's a survey, that's not a scientific study? My response is, I kind of don't care. I care in the sense that I want to know that they're not lying to us. I want to know that a lot of people are writing. And I do believe in empirical methods. I've got degrees in this stuff. However, for a program I'm not paying into, for a program where I have not heard of anybody using it, killing someone else while using it, for a program with no localized emissions, that's not worth nitpicking over. I'm looking at the bigger picture, and that is how I sleep at night, still advocating for this program. Again, narrative. And then a question about security. So I think there was even a session on this yesterday on cameras. One of the ways that we can help reduce the amount of sidewalk riding and parking is by piloting, and I believe we are moving forward with this at the beginning of May, using AI cameras on our scooters to detect sidewalks. You kind of can't have it all ways. We either have to pursue and pilot and test technology that can help with what we understand to be the biggest challenges, which is scooters blocking sidewalks and preventing access, especially for those with disabilities. And we also have to be working on making sure that whatever technology is used is safe and secure, but I don't think we can just say no to all potential solutions. And then again, the law. Every time that I remind myself that I'm in a commonwealth within a county, with a city council, I remember that there's so many rules and so many layers that I just wasn't used to in DC. And so where we stand right now is that the scooters, again, as I mentioned, are allowed and authorized at the state level through a 2-year pilot, only in Pittsburgh. They're looking at opening that up to statewide. There are some arduous insurance requirements, like $2 million, which is higher than what cars are required to have, and some other things that are a little wild, but the reality is that they are looking at expanding it, and I really, really, really hope it passes. And I really hope that we have compelled our local legislators to not reverse what they previously approved a few years ago. But we're staying tuned on that. We're trying to make sure that all of the great lessons, the great numbers that I've shared today, are being communicated upwards so that people know that this is something that's getting people around, getting people who don't have access to a car around. I didn't share it up here, but racially, our demographics are more diverse than overall for the city of Pittsburgh. Income-wise, folks have lower income. Age-wise, the typical user is 18 to 24. Sometimes people hear those statistics and they're like, oh, students, you're not really serving people. It's like, students have needs too, and especially in communities where I get complaints because there's 5 students living in a single family detached house and there's parking constraints because of that. You should realize that when we have programs and we're able to serve demographics like this in a really high density area, this is helping you too. So it's not just about the benefit to the individual, it's also about the benefits to all the people around them. So what's next? Like I mentioned, solutions. We want to make sure that if there's tech solutions to reducing the amount of sidewalk parking, or low-tech solutions like maybe a lock-to mechanism, even though even walking around Portland, you can see scooters with tethers that are just parked in the middle of the sidewalk. So I know that that's not a silver bullet. But we do want to keep exploring. That is, again, the benefit of this being not an official public-private partnership. Spin just has a permit to operate in our city, quite frankly, but by having a close relationship, a good working relationship with them, we can collaborate on potential solutions. We have a final evaluation report that we are required to produce as part of the state's authorizing legislation, so that's coming out really soon. And we're also going to do a final report that kind of says, what does the future of shared mobility look like in Pittsburgh? Ideally it'll say what the density of different devices should be and where they should be. I know that if it was up to a council member, a certain council member that held a public hearing recently, that they would say, only have scooters if they're in stations like bike share. Well, quite frankly, bike share doesn't even serve my neighborhood, which is pretty close to downtown and flat, which is not something you can say about a lot of Pittsburgh. So I know that there are places that we are serving because we have a dockless model in place that would not be served if we went entirely station-based. But I do think that there's some solutions in between that. And additional mobility hubs is a way to get there. We've got $1 million in CMAQ money that comes online in '24. And even if scooters as a form factor have to go away, the rest of MooPGH will still be here. We'll still have transit. We'll still have bike share. We'll still have car share. And so still making sure that access to those services as seamless as possible is a goal. And then this picture, I love. I took it myself. I loved it because the woman is so happy riding a scooter. You may notice that the sidewalk is closed, the road is closed because of construction, that bus stop is closed, so there's no transit service, but she was able to get around. And that's what this is about. It's about having that menu of options. It's about enabling people to get around. It's about making sure that the narrative isn't controlled by people who have a limited perspective. And it's about making sure that all the benefits that we see on our side of the table are communicated so that these services can continue. Thank you.